Sorry.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or morning or evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. Welcome to the third round, America's premier and hardest-hitting bar-based political policy discussion program. I'm your host, Pat Clark. I'm here today, again, with the redoubtable Chris Potter, senior executive editor of the Pittsburgh City paper, and stand-in host last week while I was not well. I was really not. I coughed and everything. And our special guest today, candidate for Pittsburgh City School Board, Heather Arnet.
The T is silent. I just thought we'd buy it.
Actually, that would be my first question, but we'll get into that later.
What are you, French or something?
Is that a question?
Yeah, it is actually a question. What are you,
Let's go right to the hard-hitting questions.
Yeah. Arnet, though people are welcome to say Arnet, but my dad says Arnet, and yep, our people came originally from France, but many, many moons ago. In fact, we've been in America so long that my great-grandfather fought in the Civil War on the Yankee side.
On whose side? Okay, good. Wow.
Yep.
All right.
So French, you must be from North Versailles.
They're from the Alsace-Lorraine region, actually, which, depending on who
on
you
what
are,
decade
when
it
you
is,
say
it could
that,
be German.
It could be German.
That's right.
So I have friends whose parents are German who like to think that we're German too.
Really?
But we left when it was still French.
You're not just trying to appeal to the heavy German contingent in your district now, are you?
Yeah. Well, okay. You know, there's some good crossovers in the Alsace-Lorraine region. But yeah, they left before the Civil War and came here, and it's all been French American since then. So yeah.
And Pittsburghian. Well, today it launches the first of a series of hard-hitting candidate forums. Nah, I don't like forums. We got forums everywhere.
We should also say that by
anything.
a series we mean there may be two.
Well, we're going to try to get as many people as possible. Today we were 1 out of 2 in terms of the candidates for this particularly school board seat.
Yes. For those playing along at home and hoping to see Ms. Arnet's rival in the upcoming school board election, her name is Stephanie Techa. She is also running for School Board District 7.
District 2.
District 2.
Yeah.
7.
District 2.
I'm just thinking of City Council. Sorry about that. Ms. Techa declined our invitation to come here this afternoon because she was concerned that being in a bar would send a bad message, given that this is a school board race, and kids at home might be watching. So I guess perhaps one of our first questions should be, what are you? Some kind of lush? You're here in a bar. It appears to be you're drinking something of.
I'm drinking seltzer water. Okay. For the folks at home, you can both attest to that.
We can vouch for the fact that Heather Arnet is a lightweight. So if you look for school board candidates who can hold their liquor, we cannot vouch for the fact as to whether Ms. Arnet is one of those.
Yeah. But I agreed to come because kids would be watching. In fact, I haven't had that many opportunities to talk about school board issues on YouTube, and I think that school board's most relevant to teenagers. So I hope that you're out there watching, and regardless of where this was going to be filmed, I decided to come and talk with you and talk to these folks because I think kids need to know what's going on in the school board and what school board candidates think. So that's why I'm here.
Great. So tell us a little bit about, you are now running to replace Patrick Dowd, who is running for City Council in District 7. People haven't been hearing much from the school board lately because a few years ago there was all kinds of fireworks and craziness and all that stuff, but it's been kind of quiet since then. So what's your assessment of the school district right now? What kind of job is Superintendent Mark Roosevelt doing, and why would a nice girl like you be running for a school board post like this?
Those are all good questions. So, first of all, I'm not running against an incumbent. The guy who's in the school board seat now, his term's up and he's not running for re-election. So, it's not whether I've thought that he personally was doing a good job or not. He's leaving and that seat's empty.
Do you think he was doing a good job?
I think he brought some really important things to the school board, like they're not fighting as much. Not that he singularly did that, but it's nice to see, certainly, that the school board stopped arguing and micromanaging for a while and actually focused on fiscal management and student achievement. It's really, when you've got 9 people in a room and they're focused on arguing with one another, it's hard to actually do the job. So I think one of the things he did was bring a little bit more respect to the room, and also tried to build some bridges to folks around the table, and that's good. I think we're also different people. We come from different backgrounds. Dad was a school teacher. I'm not a school teacher. I come from the nonprofit community. I work with youth. I have a youth group, Girls as Grantmakers, who did the Girl Caught against Abercrombie and Fitch, and I'm very interested in engaging youth in civic action. but come from more of a nonprofit business background, whereas Dowd came from an education background. I think the district's going in a good direction, mainly because they're admitting that there's a problem. One of the things that I like the most about the superintendent right now is he starts out most of his community talk saying 50% of the people graduating from our Pittsburgh public schools are not proficient in reading and writing. And it's good to have someone at the top admitting that there's a problem, because then you can start fixing it.
But doesn't that mean 50% of people are graduating with a proficiency in math reading?
Are you the half? Is the glass
Why
is
do we
half
always
full?
focus on the negative part?
Well, it also means that proficiency is a bullshit term. It doesn't really mean a very good thing, and it doesn't mean excellence.
But it certainly is not a good thing if we're talking about what's the school district's job. It really should be educating kids and fulfilling a promise of the community.
Right.
It takes tax dollars, right? We've got lots of property taxes here in the city because of our school district. And so there's no return on investment for the taxpayers, and certainly not doing a great job for kids and parents. So that's sort of where I think things are right now, is you've got a board and a superintendent that are more focused on reform and change. The thing that I'm most excited about and most hopeful about is the Pittsburgh Promise.
Okay. Which, for those who are following along at home, is sort of a unfunded at this point kind of promise that students who graduate from the Pittsburgh Public Schools with their graduate thing will get assistance if they want to go on to college.
Exactly.
The concern about this, Heather, as of course you know, is that this is something that Mark Roosevelt, the superintendent, and Mayor Luke Ravenstall said, we're going to do this, and then nobody had any freaking money for it.
Right.
So
exactly.
a lot of people have kind of written it off and just said this is just some kind of BS political kind of election
and I
year
think
thing.
that's exactly what it is, without a plan or people committed to fulfilling that promise. So that's what I hope to do on the school board. You know, when is raise an endowment for the Pittsburgh Promise, and first set up a fundraising plan for the Promise. You know, whenever any of us are looking to, I hope that when people think about running for office, they think about what can I bring to that entity. Whether for me, it's what can I bring to the school board. If someone's thinking about running for mayor, they should be thinking, what can I bring to that city? I have a background in fundraising, both in the nonprofit and business community. I raise money every day for my nonprofit, which is the Women and Girls Foundation. Before that, I was the director of development for City Theater. Before that, I worked raising venture capital money for .coms.
Sure.
So fundraising is something I'm comfortable with. But also, you know, I'm fortunate to be in the foundation community, and because of working with other folks in the community doing some public advocacy, I also have relationships with legislators. That's all relevant, because if we're going to fulfill the Pittsburgh Promise, we need board members who can develop a fundraising plan, work with the superintendent and mayor to raise the money, and make sure the promise becomes a reality. If that happens, the whole district can change.
How does this differ from the Promise? Is based on a model in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which started sort of in a different way. It wasn't a political push. It was
started
an
by the
endowment
foundation
push.
community. Exactly.
How do you overcome the fact that this is right now just an idea and doesn't necessarily have the backing of those people who would be able to fund something like this?
Well, you know, the foundation community is reinvested in the school district. You know, there was a strong pull-out from the school board when the board was so dysfunctional that it was focused on micromanaging, arguing, and no one was really at the table putting any focus on student achievement. Now the foundation community is reinvesting, so that's a good sign. And I think, you know, from whether it's foundation folks or legislators at the state level or the governor or people nationally interested in investing in education, people are interested in the idea, but you have to have a plan and you have to ask appropriately. You know, I agree with you that the way it was announced, and announced without an endowment, might not have been the best way to go about announcing it. But it's not over. I think that now is the time for that school board to figure out, okay, you throw a promise out there, and that's not a small promise. It's especially relevant to our poorest kids in our community.
Sure.
And so you can't just throw something out there lightly and then say, oh, sorry, we didn't fulfill it. That's out there, and I know the superintendent and the mayor are committed to it. I'd like to work with them to help fulfill that promise.
The question I guess I have, though, is do you have to be a school board member to do that? I assume that the school board or the superintendent, the administration, will at some point say, we're going to hire somebody to kind of do the fundraising for us. I mean, you know, I don't dispute that you have
and
experience
if our
with
taxpayers think we should spend more money to hire a consultant to do that, that's great. It'd be, you know, if they vote for me and I get on the school board, I'm already going to be volunteering that time for free. And, you know, sometimes in the past, you know, board members are involved in lots of different committees, sort of everybody, you know, I want a finger in every pot. I don't really want a finger in every pot. This is something I can do well, and there's a need. And I like to be able to get on the board and help them do that. So I think that we don't have to spend money to raise money in that particular regard.
Okay.
Also, as a parent and as a taxpayer into that school district, I think that it is up to that school board to fulfill that promise. That school board, that mayor, that superintendent, you can't just put a promise out there and then, bring in some consultants from Atlanta to help you fundraise. It's all about relationships here in Pittsburgh and Western PA.
It's good to have a role in the larger school system, but you're running in a school district, District 2. Tell me a little bit about District 2, what makes up District 2, and what are some of the challenges? What schools have been closed? How has it been affected in some of the changes that Mr. Roosevelt implemented in the last couple of years?
In this district.
Right, in District 2. District 2 is a very exciting district. I'm sure other people's districts are too, but I'm particularly passionate about District 2. And it incorporates Highland Park, Morningside, Stanton Heights, Lawrenceville, Polish Hill, where we are right now. Then it goes over the river into Spring Hill, Spring Garden, Troy Hill, East Allegheny. What all those neighborhoods actually have in common is new folks moving into them. At different degrees throughout those neighborhoods. But striking. The age demographics are striking right now in those neighborhoods. I'm door knocking. I'm going, if I haven't been to your house yet and you're in District 2, you'll just see me next week. But we're knocking. That's right. We're knocking on every door. We want to have connected with all the voters in our district before Election Day, which is May 15th. And May 15th. Don't forget that. And what's striking is the age demographics. I volunteered on campaigns. The last presidential race, the last governor's race, the governor's race before that. I'm knocking on the same blocks, and the age is down by 30 years on some streets. And what we're seeing is, really young folks and young business owners moving into Highland Park, Morningside, Stanton Heights, Lawrenceville. And with them comes new energy and reinvestment in those communities. But what all those new families and all those new business owners want to know is what's going to happen with the schools. Because at some point, you have to think about whether you're staying in your neighborhood or whether you're going.
Right.
And for a lot of people, the schools are the thing that answer that question. So that's really what's happening right now in District 2, which is you have several neighborhoods that have benefited from other neighborhoods being much more expensive to live in. So people who were priced out of other neighborhoods came and moved into Highland Park, to Morningside, Stanton Heights, Lawrenceville. All the retail businesses that are popping up on Butler Street. There's talk about Morningside's Main Street being revitalized. Talk in Troy Hill. I was just at a planning committee meeting in Troy Hill. There's tremendous opportunity up there. Troy Hill, Spring Garden, all that development on the North Shore. Talk about promoting those communities as great places for all those workers at the casinos to be living in. Talk about, putting a restaurant at the top of Troy Hill with a great view of the city, to attract the tourists. Come up there, stay at a bed and breakfast in Troy Hill instead of a downtown hotel. So they've got a lot of ideas, and I think what District 2 has in common is lots of opportunity for growth. But the schools are at the heart of it, because the thing that parents, families, businesses look at when they're looking at real estate, the first thing they ask is, how are the schools?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your particular race. You and correct me if I'm wrong here, you and Ms. Techa were both behind Patrick Dowd when he first ran a few years ago. Now you're both running for his seat. What's the story there? Because one would have thought that you kind of both have the same general goals and aspirations for the school district. Why are you both kind of competing with each other to replace him now?
Sure. So the history of that was 4 years ago, and the board, as we were talking about, was in, disarray. And you look back at the headlines, and the board was so focused on arguing, they weren't being productive. The foundation community pulled money out. Nationally, our school board had become really quite shameful, and the city was in shame for the reputation of the board. So really from a grassroots perspective, people from throughout all of those neighborhoods I mentioned started to say, who's thinking about running? We've got to have somebody from our community run for school board who's interested in change and into making things better and putting student achievement and fiscal management right back at the key focus of the school board. So I held this meeting at the East Liberty Library, and this is back in 2003, and said, hey, anybody thinking about running for school board, come to the East Liberty Library. We're going to have everybody do their talk, and then we're going to vote, and the community is going to endorse somebody. And if you want to take part in this process, the only thing you have to agree on is that if you're not endorsed, you're not going to run against the person who is. Because what they realized when they went back and looked at it was, if you have an incumbent and then you have 10 grassroots candidates running against them, and most of the time they often like agree with one another,
Right.
there's just subtle differences. So they lose, and the incumbent wins again. They were like, we have to stop doing this. Let's all rally and support one person. And that's what they did. Patrick Dowd was one of the people. Stephanie was one of the people who spoke to the library that day. Dowd received the endorsement, and then the community backed him.
Including Stephanie herself.
Including
She backed
Stephanie,
him.
who actually
Okay.
was his campaign committee chair.
Okay, very good.
And together, the community was able to not just defeat an incumbent, but the then school board president.
Right.
Okay, fast forward, 4 years later, same coalition said, let's do the same thing again. As soon as Patrick Dowd announced he wasn't going to run for his seat again, they said, okay, well, that model last year really worked out well. Let's do that again. Instead of waiting for the party to sort of select somebody in their ranks, let's see who in the community is thinking about running. That's how I found out about the school board race, was people in the community saying, hey, you know, who's thinking about running? We're really trying to encourage parents and concerned citizens in the community to do it. So I went to the East Liberty Library in January, had to fill out a candidate questionnaire beforehand, and sign a document that said, you know, I pledge to support the endorsed candidate from this coalition.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not endorsed, I'm not going to run for school board. I'm going to support that person. Signed my name, you know, January. Went to East Liberty Library. It was myself, Stephanie, and Bill Woodward, 3 candidates. We all gave our talk. There was a Q&A, and then the room voted. I was the endorsed candidate. I think we had, we try not to you know, share the numbers, but it was a very strong majority. And so I was the endorsed candidate. Bill very graciously, right away said, I want to be on your campaign committee. I want to help out. His wife's a member of the Federation of Teachers. You know, he's great. And Stephanie said, I'm breaking my pledge with the community. I'm going to run anyway. And that's why we're running against one another
Okay,
now.
but what she said was, I'm not going to break my pledge with the community. What she says is, I'm going to break my pledge with the people who are in this group. I mean, I don't know how many people actually voted.
1,600 members
okay, so,
in the district where the voting size is 3,000. So that's a pretty good
but it's
portion of
still.
your
But on the
voters.
other hand, I mean, she's still talking about running for the entire district as opposed to running for the approval of your.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel this
And
need
then-
because
you're
she's
right.
not here to sort
But
of.
of course, the
be
thing
her
is,
advocate.
nobody forced any of us to go through
Right.
that process.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, I signed that same document, and I had no
Sure.
idea what would happen. And in fact, you know, it's interesting. I've seen my POTA, and she said, oh, well, you know, the fix was in. My child was actually at Children's Hospital the week leading up to the endorsement. I did nothing. I mean, God's honest truth. I had no idea who would be in the room. I didn't know if I would get the endorsement. But I also felt like if I go to the library and I can't convince, you know, 100 people at the library to vote for me, then you know, why bother spending 4 months of my life campaigning?
But to play devil's advocate with
Yeah.
you, which I feel obliged to do because
Yeah.
Ms. Techa isn't here, Bill Peduto also didn't get the endorsement of the party
But
for
he didn't
mayor.
sign something saying he would
Okay.
drop out of the race if
Say
he
that
didn't
it-
get the
okay.
endorsement. I mean, that is, you know,
Right.
I mean, nobody forced her to sign it. Nobody forced her to participate. She could have run for the Democratic Party endorsement and run for school board and never participated in the community coalition
Mm-hmm.
process. You know, I mean, we as candidates, we choose whether we want to be considered for endorsements. We also choose what we sign our names to. But I think, especially with school board, it's important about honoring community pledges. People campaign, they make promises left and right.
Sure.
I sat here and I said to you, if I get on the school board, I'm going to work to raise money for the Pittsburgh Promise.
Right.
If I don't do it, you as voters hold me accountable. And 4 years later, you should vote me out if I haven't raised any money for that promise. Like, that's what holding politicians accountable to promises is about.
When some of our viewers may be regretting that Ms. Techa isn't here to make it a knockdown, drag-out brawl at this point, but
I know I am.
We do have the ability. We do have the ability, and certainly we'll follow up with her and encourage her if she has any rebuttals or points to make. It's easy enough done on the blog section of
Sure.
where we post the video. So.
Let me also ask, because I've spoken to Ms. Techa. I mean, one issue that has gotten her very interested in this race and in the operation of the school board in general is the treatment of special education students. I believe she has a child who is herself in the special education program. And Ms. Techa's concern is with the sort of redistricting and a lot of the things that Superintendent Roosevelt has been doing, a lot has changed, and her perception is that some of these special education kids have been, you know, shoved into sort of classrooms that are built on the end of a hallway, and sort of, just that they have been treated kind of like second-class citizens. And I'm curious whether you agree with her on that, and what, if you do agree with her, kind of what you would do to remedy that situation.
I actually, on several fronts, agree with her. I agree with her that it's important that special education needs of students, and that's a very large term, it encompasses tons of kids with a range of different abilities and disabilities. And I think that it's so interesting. Our district actually, and this is not to say that there haven't been difficulties for her family or for other kids, but just to give us a historical perspective, this district has been a leader nationally in services to special education kids and families. That's not saying we're doing the job perfect, but I think it does say that there has been historically a commitment to special education services being part of our district. It's actually part of why the Pittsburgh Public Schools spend $5,000 more per pupil than any other district in our region. People talk about the Mount Lebanon School District. Mount Lebanon spends $10,000 per pupil. We spend $15,000 per pupil. Right. A big portion of that is because we have different special education needs. And I'm very proud that we're part of a district that takes that seriously, and that has also incorporated important mainstreaming programs for kids, especially kids that have hearing difficulties and vision difficulties, who of course should be in school just like any other kids, who thrive academically. One of our girls is grant makers, one of our Girl Cop girls is a brilliant writer who's at Kappa, and she read a short story to us recently that just broke our hearts and inspired us, and she has she's visually disabled. Who cares? She's just one of the most brilliant writers who's going to come out of Pittsburgh, and she's thriving at Kappa and has always, has been in the schools, and I think that that's a perfect example of where we're doing it right. I think what Stephanie's talking about, she knows at a very personal perspective.
Sure.
Like her kid's experience, her school. I'm not going to devalue that in any way. And also, she knows more about that personal experience than I could ever learn from reading any paper. But I think that what's most important is that when parents feel alienated or feel that they have been disengaged from the system, or disconnected or disenfranchised, that there are systems in place to help them reconnect, to be able to get those voices heard by the district and by the superintendent, and that those voices are heard. So where I agree with her and where I would work to remedy that issue is really making sure that our district and our board have models in place for parents' advocacy groups to actually get feedback back to the district and change policy, right? Whether it's this issue or some other issues. There are other people who have very different issues of concern. Right now, I was door knocking. I ran into a teenager who goes to Alderdice who's really unhappy that the new principal says they can't have lunch outside. Well, that's an issue with different stakes than special ed parents' concerns. But it also is about how do you empower students and parents to advocate on their issues, and that's
do you
where
have a
I'm
child
much more
in the Pittsburgh Public Schools right now?
Soon, he's 4.
Okay.
So
but if I'm a parent right now and I have a special needs kid in the public schools, to me, I'm gonna say, you know what, Stephanie Techa knows what I'm going through because she's going through it herself.
Right. Well, her child's actually not in the school system now. She graduated.
Okay. But she's walked that walk in the past. So why would I? Well, what you're saying is we should create this kind of community thing that will
policies that will
right. Why would I not trust Stephanie Techa, who's actually kind of been through this system from soup to nuts?
Partly because she is talking about a personal experience, and she's not talking about putting policies in place to empower parents, advocates, and students. And you need to have a policy in place. You need to have systems in place for students to have a voice and for parents to have a voice. And there have been efforts at that level. A+ Schools has done a lot of work trying to do more parents forums. There's also Peel, which is actually, there's a group that Stephanie's on the board of that's all about parents' advocacy for special education needs. So there are some bodies in place to help empower people to have authority and voice in the system. But what I will say to your question about being a parent is, I would actually, not argue that parents at different levels aren't interested, but one of the biggest decisions you make is which kindergarten to put your kid into. It is the beginning, and that's where I am. Before I was a school board candidate, I was a parent spending a day at every single elementary school in the Pittsburgh Public Schools thinking about which school my kid was going to be in. Right. And it just doesn't get any more personal than that. And my kid's starting that journey. He's going to Pittsburgh Montessori, and when I visited that school, I had the same experience as when I visited so many other schools, which was, this is a school with great opportunity. There are things here that are working brilliantly, and there are things here that need a lot of help.
Yeah.
I could have chosen to send my kid to the school that's perfect,
Which
that's
is
done.
what is that school?
Yeah, really, exactly. Winchester Thurston,
Oh,
right?
okay,
I mean,
okay,
people,
right,
they'll say, oh, so you're thinking about moving, are you leaving the neighborhood, or are you sending your kid to a private school, right? Those are like option A or B when you live in our district. And I wanted option C, which is, no, I'm going to stay in the neighborhood I love, in the house I love, with the neighbors I care about, and send my kid to public school and invest in making those schools better. And I'm investing with the two things I can, my own kid and my volunteer time, right? Which is what running for the school board's about. But Travis is in that system, he's just, he's growing as fast as he can, but we just got the paperwork back, and he'll be starting school soon. But I also think, even though it's important that I put my kid right where my mouth is, like I'm sending my kid to public school, we have city officials in this town who didn't go to public school and whose kids and relations do not go to public school. But so I think that's important. But I also think I shouldn't be a parent when I'm at school board meetings. I shouldn't be there advocating for my kid or my school or my neighborhood school. I should be making policy decisions that I think are best for Pittsburgh, for all the kids in Pittsburgh, for all the taxpayers of Pittsburgh. I think part of where the school board got into trouble before was when people were coming from either my kid, or my sister who's a teacher, or my neighborhood school. Because if we're all at that school board table defending our neighborhood,
Sure.
and our turf, we'll never be able to make a decision that's good for Pittsburgh.
Which was the nightmare early on with
Right.
some of the neighborhood schooling kind
Yeah,
of debate.
schools opening, schools closing. Financially, schools did have to close,
Sure.
and nobody wants to be in the neighborhood with a school closed.
Let me ask you something, because I have heard from teachers in a sort of back channel kind of way that there are concerns about some of what Superintendent Roosevelt has done. I mean, he's created these sort of
I think also
accelerated
in the community, especially African American community leaders.
There are some concerns about where these kind of accelerated learning academies are going. There are concerns that sort of this is creating all kinds of problems. Just the sheer kind of disruptiveness of shifting students all around. A lot of stuff is happening very, very quickly in this school district right now.
Yeah.
And some of it, the rap on the superintendent is that it's not really taking full cognizance of the effect of these changes and such rapid change on students and on families and on communities. I'm curious, what would you say about, how would you assess the superintendent's performance thus far, and where there are concerns, what would you kind of do to address them?
Well, I agree with you. The change happened very quickly, and it's creating, growing pains and cultural pains within different communities of teachers, communities of students, and communities of parents that are having to deal with those changes. And I think we don't know yet whether those changes will have increased student performance, because you can't measure 1 year out.
Right.
Everybody's moved and do a test score and say, was it successful? When you're talking about systemic change, it's also talking about time. And one of the things that's happened with the schools and the closings and the shiftings and the moving is, I sort of use this metaphor of when you move out of your house. You can move from a house and move into a new house, and it can be a great new house. It can be the perfect new house for you. But, the first month, you don't know where your spatulas are.
Right.
You don't know where, the book that you need for the project you're working on right now is. You don't know where anything is. And there is a transition time where your entire kind of productivity as a person goes down in dealing with unpacking in your new house. So I'm not saying that I agree with everything, but it's very hard to measure it 1 year out, because some of what people are unhappy with. Well, first I want to say one more thing about about the rate of change.
But I'm going to make you say interesting things that are going to make you uncomfortable.
That's fine. But around the rate of change, because change making something that I'm very interested in.
Sure.
And reforming makes it sound like something's not right. Changing Pittsburgh for the better is something I'm very interested in doing.
Right.
It's why I'm running for school board. It's why I think that better schools will create a better Pittsburgh, right? Change making is something that all three of us do all day long. You can try it through incremental change, right? Or you can try and aggressively catalyze change to start moving more rapidly. What I do know is that our public schools are failing our kids, and they're failing taxpayers, and none of us have any time to waste, because those kids in those schools right now, they need help right now. How we're doing it, with the ALAs and, some extended school days, those are culture shifts. There are teachers that are unhappy with how it's being implemented. But when I've talked to teachers, and I have a lot of respect for teachers. My stepmom was a teacher, a public school teacher, my whole life. She just retired on disability this year. So, I have a lot of respect for teachers. They know the work. They're in those schools every day. And what they say is much more complicated than good, bad, right? They'll say, well, the extended school day, I understand it, but here's the problem. The kids are so antsy at the end of the day that, it's impossible. Or I've heard math coaches who say, if I could program what's going to happen with that extra slot of the time, then I could do something with it. But right now I don't have authority to build a curriculum for the extra time. Or people who say, we could do it if it were lots of shorter chunks. So I think that once you get into conversations with people, it's not love it, hate it, it's great, it's not working. It's we need to figure out how to do it better. We don't know if it's done right yet.
But what are your concerns with implementation then? That's what
my concerns with implementation are that, in some examples you have elementary schools that became K through 8 and physically weren't ready. So I've heard stories of,
just in terms of the number of rooms and class
even
size.
more. You want to put my parent even more, bathrooms that were set up for elementary school kids versus middle school kids, lockers that are set up for elementary school kids versus middle school kids.
Because they had to pee from up higher? Is that what you're saying?
You've been in the elementary school bathrooms, right, are smaller than middle school
Pat Clark
bathrooms.
has, but I
actually have those teeny little elementary school chairs at home.
That's right. But this is a perfect example of something that
it's all coming out now.
Might mean that the way that the transition happened so quickly that people weren't able to think of facilities questions.
Right.
That's not an end-all be-all issue. We can take the summer and go into that school and fix it and improve the bathroom facilities and the locker facilities. It doesn't mean, that didn't work, let's start shipping those kids back to their old school and reopen it. I mean, it's not all or nothing, and I think that the facilities issue is a perfect example. I know with high school task force reform, they're going to be much more thoughtful about those transitions.
Really? Why? What makes you say so?
Because the superintendent just did a big community meeting where the task force presented what they had learned from their national. The task force is a group of parents, community leaders, and administrators and staff from the district. They were set up to go look at top performing public schools throughout the country and come back and think about the lessons learned and how we could implement change here. And the first thing the superintendent said was, we have a bunch of recommendations, and the first year, a lot of them are being implemented, and none of them involve school closings, right? That's the first attempt. So I think that he's also learned about the rate of change.
Let me just ask you something, because there's a perception amongst, you started from the very beginning of our session here talking about, foundations withdrawing funding because there was arguing on the school board and all that stuff. And, I'm one of those people who thinks arguing isn't a bad thing, and that a school board is actually doing its job by some measurements if it challenges a superintendent and really makes that person work. To what extent do you think the school board should be in a position where it kind of takes Mark Roosevelt and just kind of spanks him a little bit and makes him really kind of justify that stuff? I mean, do you see what's the role do you think that the school board should have in those kinds of decisions?
I think that the school board should hold the superintendent accountable to benchmarks.
In terms of student performance?
In terms of everything. Financial benchmarks, just like I'm a nonprofit executive. I report to my board quarterly, right? I have revenue projections, expense projections, and programming objectives that I have to hit. And if I don't, then they're going to ask questions about, well, why didn't you, I see that you were down in revenues, or I see that you were up in expenses. Can you explain why our, this line item went over budget? That's the appropriate role of a board, right? Put in place benchmarks, objectives, and goals, and then hold that executive accountable to reaching them. And if they don't, ask questions about why. That's appropriate. But what my board should not be doing is, fighting me all 3 months through that quarter on the implementation of the strategic plan that they already agreed on, because that's just not productive. And that's why the foundations pulled the money, because they were saying, look, your superintendent, and this was the old superintendent, could not accomplish anything because they were fighting him every step of the way. That there's a big difference between holding somebody accountable, right, and rubber stamping. It's not about rubber stamping, but it's also saying, as you pursue those benchmarks, our role is actually to support you, to help you implement that strategic plan. If you fail or you're not achieving, then our job then is to hold you accountable and ask why. But constantly fighting that person won't work. And there was a superintendent change. I actually think that our past superintendent would also be thriving if he had a board that was more in place like the one now. I mean, whoever that superintendent was with that old board couldn't do anything.
Right.
Well, I see from the last drink here in the third round, we're almost at an end of another third round. I want to take the time to once again thank my guests. First of all, our political candidate, Heather Arnet, for being kind enough to join us here at Polish Hill. Mr. Potter, thanks again for being a stalwart and being here yet again.
Stalwart, yes.
And I'm again your host, Pat Clark, from high atop Polish Hill, with yet another edition of the third round. We'll see you again in about a week, more or less, and hopefully have more exciting debate and candidates on to talk about whatever they want to talk about, insofar as Chris Potter will let them.
And don't forget to vote on May 15th. Don't forget to
Absolutely.
vote. And if you're not registered to vote, you can register to vote before April 15th.
Absolutely.
And if you're too young to vote, you can still volunteer at the polls.
And for any questions on voting, everybodyvote.com. And until then, we'll see you all. Yins. Bye. Thanks. Good
May
night.
God bless.